Well, when Stephen asked me if I would preach for him while he was traveling, I told him I could. As I said at 8 o'clock, that's my first mistake. I asked if there was anything special I should be considering. He told me it was the last Sunday in his Faith and Film series. But I wouldn't need to do that if I didn't want to and could choose anything I wanted. How sad it seemed to not finish the Faith and Film series. But then he said, "You know, it's Transfiguration Sunday, don't you?" I didn't. I'm not even sure what Sunday is Easter these retirement days. I always knew when that was. I don't anymore. But I don't think Stephen knew what would immediately come to my mind when he said it was Transfiguration Sunday. But once the thought appeared, you know what it was, but once the thought appeared, there was no turning back. What film should I choose to illustrate the concept of transfiguration? Of course, for me, it had to be Harry Potter. It seems like yesterday, but it was nearly 20 years ago, in 2007, when the 7th and final book came out. We did summer church school classes for children and youth and adults, and over the years, we had done a couple of lock-ins with Harry Potter as our theme. He was, well, what shall I say? He was debatable back then, he was controversial back then, and he still is. So I was never more challenged to dig deeper into the Bible, into Presbyterian theological positions, and into classical literature, all the while trying to be creative and faithful at the same time. And here I am, years later, ending Stephen's Faith and Film series with my old friend, Harry Potter. If you've read any of the books or seen any of the movies, you know that Transfiguration is one of the required core classes for all the students at Hogwarts, where they are boarding. It is not an easy class, and practicing Transfiguration takes a lot of work. The teacher of this class is one of my favorite characters, Professor Minerva McGonagall. Let's catch a glimpse of Professor McGonagall and Transfiguration in action by watching a very short clip from the beginning of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
I should have known that you would be here, Professor McGonagall.
Good evening, Professor Dumbledore.
If you couldn't see that, it happened at night, and they are outside number 4, Privet Drive. If you don't know Harry Potter, that is meaningless. But that's where the Dursleys live. And at this point in time, we haven't met Harry yet, but he will soon enter the picture. Did you see the Transfiguration change? Could you see it? The waiting cat becomes a grown woman with a strange hat and long robes. Professor McGonagall has an animagus of a cat. That's what Wally was talking about there. Now, I love cats, but I have two known animagus choices: a rhinoceros and a buzzard. Oh well, I would love to have been the cat. That's about it for Transfiguration in the world of Harry Potter. It's a complex and often difficult art of transforming or changing one thing into another. It requires lots of hard work, lots of practice, and tricky wand movement. Transfiguration is hard in Harry Potter. So what does all this have to do with Matthew's story of Jesus transfiguring on the top of a mountain? Not anything, really, except they share a word and both involve change. And now I have held up the film end of the series bargain. Let's move on towards faith. For me, Harry Potter's world provided lots of port keys, which helped us to enter another world, such as the Bible world. We used Harry Potter to encourage children and youth to read the Bible. Here's how it worked with Transfiguration during a lock-in. I would dress up like Professor McGonagall and lead the Transfiguration class in the Hammond Library up near the chapel. I would ask the children to tell me everything they knew about Transfiguration in Harry's world, and I'll admit that they knew more than I did. Then I would ask if anyone was aware that this was also a church word. Sometimes one or two would raise their hands and tell me they had heard that word in church before. And since the lock-in was usually during this time of year, Transfiguration Sunday was often just celebrated or coming up in a week or two. Then I would ask, what did they remember about Transfiguration and the Bible? That's when the port key experience occurred. The port key is another Harry Potter word, and it takes you from one place to another. And in this case, from the world of Harry Potter to the place where I wanted them to spend some time, in the land of the Bible. In our Transfiguration class, together we would read a version of the story from one of the synoptic gospels, and then we tried to think through what happened. Was it magic that made Jesus' face shine and his clothes turn dazzling white? Was it magic that brought Moses and Elijah into the scene, or dropped a cloud covering, or created the sound effect of a booming and thunderous voice? Only, yes, if you think of magic as C.S. Lewis did in the Narnia tales, with Aslan's deep magic that was older than time. We discussed these questions, and now we will too. What actually is happening on the mountaintop? Matthew begins his story by telling us 6 days later. Later than what? To find that answer, we must turn back to chapter 16. Matthew has a deliberate sequence of events leading up to the Transfiguration story in chapter 17. First of all, Peter names Jesus as the Messiah. Second, Jesus teaches the disciples what the Messiah must do. And third, Jesus tells his disciples what they must do. What must the Messiah do? The hard stuff of suffering, death, and resurrection. What must the disciples do? The hard stuff of denying themselves, taking up their crosses, and following Jesus at the risk of losing their lives. Now and only now, 6 days later, on a mountaintop, no less, Jesus is revealed to his disciples and to us in a way he has never been seen before. His face shines like the sun, and his clothes are bright as light. Can you imagine experiencing this completely unexpected sight of your friend's startling changes? Before you can even react, 2 other men show up from nowhere, and somehow you know them to be long ago stars of the Hebrew faith. And they have mountaintop experience. Moses of the Exodus and Mount Sinai and the 10 Commandments. Elijah of the battle of the prophets of Baal on Mount Horeb and the chariot of fire. Wow. The disciples must be stunned, and 2 of them remain silent. But Peter blurts out, "Lord, it must be good for us to be here. If you wish, I will set up 3 tents here." And before he can finish speaking, God takes charge. A bright cloud overshadows them all, and God's voice says, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased." We readers know that's baptism language. And maybe, just maybe, God stops before he says anything else, stops Peter before Peter can say anything else by saying, "Listen to him." Sometimes silence is the best choice. Matthew tells us the disciples fall to the ground terrified. No wonder. But did you notice what Jesus did? He's back to Jesus' normal state. Here is their friend again, but they're not looking. Jesus touches them and encourages them to get up and not to be afraid. They look up and they see for themselves that Jesus is once again himself and by himself. The telling of the Transfiguration story of Jesus is, in Matthew's gospel, a turning point. It is for Jesus too. For the first time, in a way like nothing they have experienced before, the disciples are given a glimpse of the divinity of Jesus, and they see his glory. I am sure that Peter, at least, cannot wait to tell everyone he knows what he has seen and experienced. But Jesus silences them all. "Tell no one until I am resurrected from the dead." Don't tell anyone until I have been resurrected from the dead. What Jesus told them in chapter 16 is waiting ahead for him. It is waiting for him at the bottom of this mountain. Just like Ash Wednesday and the beginning of the Lenten season is waiting for us. I don't know if you've ever noticed. Some of you can't see it. I hope you'll look for it when we're done. There's a window right over there next to the Easter window. That's for Palm Sunday, Holy Week images, crucifixion, right there. That window, you can look out, but only through the clear glass that is in the shape of a cross. Jesus now sees the world and his friends through the shape of a cross. The transfiguration of Jesus changed him from human to God in front of our eyes for a few moments. But anyone who gets close to God changes too. Those 3 disciples cannot be the same men coming down to the bottom of the hill as they were when they were going up to the top of the mountain. But no one can stay at the top of the mountain, not even Jesus, We all must go down and begin the journey to Jerusalem, to the cross, and to the tomb. But what we know that the disciples didn't is we know the end of the story. For Matthew, the end is another trip to a mountaintop, not just for the disciples, but for us, the readers, too. Listen to how Matthew ends his story after he tells us about the crucifixion and the post-resurrection encounter of the women at the tomb. Jesus gave them instructions to give to the other disciples, to meet him in Galilee. They do. This is Matthew 28, starting at 16. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but they doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always, to the end of the age." Jesus has transfigured once again from death to life, from human to divine. The readers are transfigured into missionaries. What about us, the readers? We too are given our marching orders. Go, make, baptize, teach, and remember. We have been transfigured from readers to doers. Just like Harry Potter's Transfiguration class. Doing ministry is a complex and often difficult art of transforming or changing one thing into another. It requires lots of hard work, lots of practice, and tricky wand movement. It requires patience, prayer, kindness, and above all, love. Changing ourselves is hard. Helping bring change into the world is even harder. Pastor and poet Stephen Garnaas Holmes says it this way in his poem, Ordinary Actions. This is how we change the world, one heart at a time, by the simplest of things, a conversation, an act of generosity, mustard seeds of peace, word made flesh, ordinary actions. It isn't magic, unless we muggles remember that we are not alone on the journey we are about to take, and our magic, our deep magic, is older than time, and as deep and as high as love will take us, to the tops of mountains and the depths of tombs. Change is hard, but worth it. Our Lenten journey begins this week, and we must face ahead of us, looking through the clear glass of the cross. But remember, we are not going alone. Jesus will be with us to the end of the age. Do not be afraid. Amen.